Oh, hey everybody, how you doing today? How is everyone doing? Welcome, 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 welcome. It is August, Saturday, October 31st, Halloween, and I am sitting here in front of the bookshelf. You can thank my lovely wife for allowing me to use the bookshelf. Not always do I have access to the living room, but she is out tonight, so I don't have to use that dull white bedroom wall. Instead, we have the beautiful bookshelf that you all love so much. So, very good, very, very, very good. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and let's have a lovely Halloween evening conversation. It should be fun. Let's just talk about whatever's on your mind. The last night of October, the night before All Saints' Day. Very interesting stuff. Very, very interesting stuff. For those of you who don't know, the holiday of Halloween was originally All Hallows' Eve. And it's a Christian holiday, right? The following day is All Saints' Day. And it was believed by the Catholic Church, might still be believed by the Catholic Church, that that was the day in which the souls of the deceased from the previous year ascend into heaven. The night before, All Hallows' Eve, was believed to be when the ghosts would, the spirits of dead people, would do their last goodbyes. So it was supposed to be a very ghostly night because the spirits of dead people that float around at night would come out one last time before All Saints' Day, when they would ascend into heaven. Of course, we know that in Latin America, they celebrate the Day of the Dead. Right, as a special way of celebrating Halloween. In the United States, we have trick-or-treating and pumpkins, jack-o'-lanterns. Yeah, that is the Halloween tradition. And tonight is All Hallows' Eve, Halloween. And they show scary movies on television. People play pranks on each other. What else goes on at Halloween time? Kids go door to door dressed in costumes, trick-or-treating, which, interestingly enough, I assumed that was completely off for the pandemic, that nobody would be doing that. But I assumed wrong. I was in my favorite little restaurant here in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, my neighborhood. I was sitting in my restaurant. Of course, they're at way, way below capacity. There's every table is 10 feet away from every other table. But there weren't many people competing with me for tables. So I'm sitting at my table reading my Wall Street Journal and The Economist and going over the news. Want to start smashing pumpkins with me? No, I do not. I'm sitting there in the restaurant, got my headphones on. I'm listening to the 1812 Overture by Tchaikovsky. I'm going over the Wall Street Journal, and the door to the restaurant flies open. And there is a lovely Brooklyn mother with two of her children in a costume. And the restaurant was prepared and had candy for the children. So I was surprised. I did not realize that Halloween was still happening. Still happening despite the pandemic. But, hey, you learn something new every day, right? You learn something new every day. Now, one thing I did hear is that apparently last night there was a party somewhere in Brooklyn, and 400 people attended it, and that was a huge violation of the COVID-19 restrictions. Some folks are facing some serious criminal charges for doing that gathering. But I did, and then when I walked from the restaurant back to my lovely Brooklyn apartment, a few blocks, I did see various people in costumes, and apparently Halloween is not completely called off. Halloween is still happening. So be happy about it, I guess, right? The COVID-19, even here in New York City, where there's still quite a few cases, they have not called off Halloween. Now, I do understand that Britain, they're now imposing stay-at-home orders once again. In the UK, because they're being pretty badly hit, and everyone's saying second wave, second wave. I'm worried about this election. I'm not thrilled about the situation in the country, and I can't see a good outcome either way in this election. I can see some various negative scenarios that can come out of this. I don't think there's any real outcome of this election that would put a smile on my face. Let me put it that way. But there are some that would make me more upset than others. But fingers crossed we have a clear result in the next couple days, and then we're done, right? And then it's over, and we can all move on. And, we don't go into martial law with two factions of the deep state fighting each other or something scary and awful like that that would be bad for everyone in the country. Let's hope that it's just a smooth, the votes come in. We have to wait a little bit because it's a vote by mail, but the votes come in. It's clear who won. We can move on. That's what I'm hoping for happening. Michael Moore, the filmmaker, he was on The Hill with Crystal Ball and Sagar. And the interview that he gave took a strange turn about 11 minutes in. They were almost trying to shut him up. He was naming some possible hypothetical situations where Michael Moore, where Donald Trump sends the Department of Justice to seize ballots or something, and they were trying to shut him up, like, don't go there, don't go there. It got weird. It got pretty weird. Sorry, I'm about to pour my unnamed orange beverage, and I just wanted to make sure there wasn't any water left there because the ice had been melting. So I always have liked to have my orange juice with ice. It's always so much better. Warm orange juice is not very good, but I like to drink my orange juice or my unnamed orange beverage with ice. So yes, as far as the election, that's the real scare this Halloween. But, I was making my way through the weekend edition of the Wall Street Journal. Not much that was delightful in it. There were just two items that stood out to me, just classic. Right? Two items stood out to me. One was on page 2 and the other was on page 3. Item on page number 2, they informed us, with no commute, Americans worked more. With no commute, Americans worked more. I'm writing it down. Reparations. All right. So, think about that. Right? The ruling class of the United States has been wasting all this money by, maintaining offices and workplaces. And people work more when you just have them work from home. Never let a good crisis go to waste, as the ruling class of the United States tells itself quietly. Right? Are we going to have employers now saying, that whole office thing, that whole workplace thing, we're going to get rid of that? Why doesn't everyone just work from home? Oh, goodness. It says they spent over 22 million extra hours on their primary job each workday. Right? Americans actually work harder from home than they do at the office. That's one of the big discoveries of the pandemic from the American ruling class. But there was another item that I thought was amusing. Kind of reminds me of Michael Moore, who I just mentioned. Walmart to put guns back in stores. Right? Do you remember when Walmart stopped selling guns? And there was this liberal, outpouring that, yes, Walmart is no longer selling guns. And, I think in the movie Bowling for Columbine, Michael Moore, he actually, had his camera crew go to Walmart and show how easy it was for Walmart to sell them bullets and guns. And Walmart, suddenly, they're not selling guns. But now, right, with all this fear of the contested election and the pandemic, gun sales are through the roof. And there's probably was a meeting, I would assume, at the Walmart offices, at the headquarters. And they said, why are we losing out on all these gun sales right now? There have been more gun sales in the year of 2020 alone so far than in the entire year of 2019, right? The FBI has surpassed its record for the number of background checks. So, yeah, there you go. In other news, unnamed diet beverage, unnamed orange beverage. In other news, Sean Connery, the actor who first portrayed James Bond, has passed away. And Twitter is in an uproar debating his legacy. Twitter is having an uproar. Many people see him as a fine actor. But at the same time, he apparently did, justify domestic violence. He gave some interviews where he said it was acceptable to strike a woman, for a husband or a boyfriend to strike a woman. That's not cool at all. But his legacy is up for debate. But everyone agrees he was certainly a fine actor, if not an upstanding, political figure. Was a Scotsman. And many people noted that he was an amazing actor, yet he maintained his accent in every movie, right? He would play King Arthur, and he would still talk like this when he played King Arthur, and that he sounded like a Scotsman in every movie. But that was okay. I mean, he had a character, and he played that character. It reminded me of the fact that when I was in the 5th grade, I read all the Ian Fleming novels. I think there were 2 of them I didn't read. I didn't read The Living Daylights, and I didn't read, there was another, I didn't read Thunderball. No, I read Thunderball. Thunderball was the one that the novel came out after the movie. I can't remember. There were a couple I didn't read. 5th and 6th grade, I read the Ian Fleming novels. I think the first one that I read was Diamonds Are Forever. I read Diamonds Are Forever, and then they had them at the library. They're very accessible, and I remember I read Diamonds Are Forever, and I read which one was the next one? I don't remember what order I read them in, but I read them. The one that I liked the most was You Only Live Twice, because it had a bad ending. It did not have a happy ending. I guess I won't spoiler alert it for you. But it was the only one I read that I actually read a second time. I remember reading You Only Live Twice a couple times because I found it kind of profound. And of course, now that everyone should Twitter take down HD content. What is HD content? I don't know what HD content is. But what I do remember is that they are really, really right-wing books. They're really, really, really right-wing books. I was not very political as a 5th grader, and I was, not very political. So I wasn't thinking about politics too much, but I knew, you shouldn't use racial and ethnic slurs, which he uses all throughout the books. He uses them in a particularly British way. For example, he would, if it was somebody of a certain race, that he would, if it was a female, he would put ESS on the end of it, which I'd never heard before. I'd heard people use racial slurs before, but I'd never heard in Ian Fleming's books that every racial and ethnic derogatory term, if you're using it for a female, you have to throw ESS on the end of it. I learned that from Ian Fleming in his novels. Okay, so that's what you mean. All right, writing it down. All right, I'll answer that in the Q&A. I learned that from the Ian Fleming books. They're blatant white supremacism. James Bond travels to every corner of the world, right? That's kind of the selling point of the Ian Fleming novels. He goes to every corner of the planet, and he then proceeds to make derogatory and judgmental and supremacists, comments about every country he visits, and talks about the British being superior. Ian Fleming was very, very much a racist, very, very much a sexist, but they're exciting stories. I was a fifth grader, and, my parents weren't going to let me see the movies. So my mother, being a librarian who was very much, very adamant about the fact that I would be allowed to read what I wanted, she wasn't going to stop me from reading. So I did read almost all of the James Bond books. Well, I mean, looking back on it, I mean, was it a deep impact on my political development? I mean, I certainly don't agree with it. Yeah, I mean, wow. I remember the one that takes place in Louisiana, in New Orleans. Um, they're completely different than the movies. I think there was like one that was similar to the movie. I think the book From Russia with Love is similar to the movie. It's almost exactly the same. But every other one, Doctor No, Goldfinger, they completely changed everything. But yeah, I mean, James Bond is this kind of dark, masculine, upper class British man who goes around having adventures and yeah, Ian Fleming's novels. Yeah, they are quite amusing, I guess. What else do I remember about Ian Fleming's novels? They're very Atlanticist, let me say. A lot of people talk about the domestic violence. There are many passages in the books of Ian Fleming, not just the interviews of actor Sean Connery, but in the books where he's justifying domestic violence. Um, what I thought was interesting when I was a kid was that James Bond was masculine. He's like the most masculine man ever, but he's also got this elegance about him. He knows exactly the right clothing to wear. Um, that's a good question. Alrighty. He knows exactly what clothing to wear. He knows exactly what wine to drink. He's a classy fellow. And I guess in the area that I grew up in, that was not considered to be masculine. If one fumbled with, it was too concerned about how one looked. If one was too concerned about, ordering the most classy wine and stuff, that was considered to be kind of effeminate. But James Bond, he was very much, there's the shaken not stirred, and it was weird. He was masculine, but it was a very different kind of masculinity. It was a more British upper class masculinity. I thought is okay. Order. Alrighty, just writing it all down as it comes in. What else? I don't know if folks thought, and thank you, Herb Bryant. I do appreciate the super chat. I don't know if folks noticed. But China has announced that its natural gas consumption is going to greatly expand. China is switching, it's launching a coal to gas initiative where parts of their economy that currently run on coal are going to be switching to running on natural gas, and that is part of their new 5-year plan. I think that's fascinating. And that'll be very good for countries around the world, like the United States and like Russia, that are natural gas producers. I know China has also been developing its own natural gas industry, and they've been taking natural gas from ice. They've got a process of taking natural gas from ice, which is kind of like fracking, except it's not from soil, it's from ice, which is fascinating. I don't know if people saw, but today in Beverly Hills, there were scuffles. There were scuffles in Beverly Hills between Trump supporters and Antifa kind of people. There was some kind of pro-Trump parade in Beverly Hills. There were protesters opposing the pro-Trump parade, and there were some scuffles. Scuffles broke out. Riot police moved in. Got a little bit ugly. I really, we all know California is going to go for Trump, but that happened. That certainly did happen today. Furthermore, I wanted to just, because there's not that much to talk about other than this awful election and things, I wanted to just quickly touch on an incident that happened in August of 1949. And it's an incident that was famous at the time. It was famous at the time, but not a lot of people know about it. Even though like there were a couple movies that were made about it. There's a song that I really like that was written about it. But not a lot of people know about it, and that's the Man Gulch Fire of 1949. And it's an incident that a lot of people have overlooked, but it's quite fascinating. So in August of 1949, a wildfire started burning in West Montana, and it was just a huge wildfire. And so they dispatched and airdropped 15 firefighters to put out the fire. And so they were airdropped to put out the fire. And in the course of trying to fight this fire, the firefighters were trapped. They were trapped. They had like a ridge behind them, so they couldn't escape, and the fire was coming towards them, and they were trapped. So one of the firefighters had the idea, because he had read in comic books, that what you're supposed to do if you're trapped, who in the world would know this, but if you are trapped near a wildfire, and a wildfire is coming towards you and you're trapped, what you're supposed to do is light a fire of your own. Now, who in the world would have known that? So, they're trapped, these firefighters are trapped, and the one firefighter has read in a children's comic book that what you're supposed to do if the fire is coming towards you, a big wildfire is coming towards you, you're supposed to strike a match and light a fire where you're at to burn up all the grass and debris around you, so that when the fire gets there, you'll be kind of protected because everything around you will be burnt up already. Now, who in the world would know such a thing? Who would ever think of such a thing? But apparently this firefighter had read it in a comic book. So as the fire was coming at these 15 firefighters in 1949 in August, he struck a match, and he lit a fire and started telling the other firefighters to jump into the fire that he just lit. And of course, they looked at him like he was a lunatic, right? Because it's like they're already facing this big fire coming at them. They're trapped. And so he's like, well, this is the only thing we can do. He lights a match and sets a fire where they're at and says, jump into the fire. Of course, they don't do it. Now, one other guy apparently did it with him or somehow lived or whatever, but 13 firefighters died. The only 2 survived, and one of the ones who survived was the guy who did that. Perhaps this is where the expression fight fire with fire comes from. I don't know if that's where it comes from or not, but it was a horrendous incident, the Man Gulch Fire of 1949, a huge wildfire. And 13 firefighters died. And the one who lived, he lived by lighting a fire of his own and jumping into it. Now, that is some crazy stuff. A crazy incident. I actually learned about the incident because there was a folk song that I heard on the radio about it called Cold Missouri Water. And it's a great folk song. One of my favorite folk songs to listen to. It came out in the 1990s, and it tells the story of this incident, the Man Gulch Fire of 1949. But yeah, that was the thing. The guy, they were trapped, and so he lit a fire and jumped into the fire to avoid being hit by the big fire, right? And then when the big fire got there, everything in the area he was in had been burned out. All the high grass and stuff in his area had been burned out, so the fire, when it got to him, wasn't intense enough to kill him. Crazy stuff, right? And in that panicked moment, it's just wild stuff. Marxism being optimistic, given that, what is your take? I'm not going to talk about people I work with. I work with him, and I'm not going to talk about that. So don't ask me stuff like that. But anyhow, Yeah, it was a crazy incident. And so I would encourage you to check out the song Cold Missouri Waters. There's actually a book that was very popular in the 1990s about the incident. It was called Young Men and Fire. And I believe there were even a couple movies that were made because at the time it happened, it was kind of like big news nationally. And the guy who had lit the fire was kind of a hero in a way. It was kind of a shocker because he had read in this comic book that that's what you're supposed to do. But apparently that's true. If you are trapped, so if anyone's watching this, right? If ever you are trapped and there's a wildfire coming at you, apparently what you're supposed to do, right, is strike a match and burn out the area that you're in. That is apparently something that people do. Someone asked a question about Muslims. What's the question about Muslims? Someone was asking a question about Muslims. I don't know. What was that question? Um, what was that? I'm getting some weird super chats tonight. It is a strange night for super chats. I'll tell you that much. Wow, wow, wow. So someone explain to me what this super chat about. Did you get my question about Muslims was? And if that's the case, if someone explains that to me, then we can jump into our roll call. This is a strange night. Strange night. This was the super chat. Ugh, the ugh here. What is this? What's going on? What's going on in China with the Muslims? Okay. What? China Muslims. Okay. All right. Let's jump into the super chats. This has been a strange, strange evening, but hey, it's Halloween, right? And I talked to you about Walmart and guns and Ian Fleming novels and China, natural gas, and Beverly Hills and the Man Gulch Fire of 1949. And hey, it's a strange night. That's okay. That's totally okay. Names and locations, folks. I'll call you out as I see you as I drink my unnamed orange beverage. What a strange night it is. Names and locations: Salt Lake City, Cleveland, somewhere, USA. Queens, New York City, Lloyd Bennett, JT24, Mississippi, Joey in Belize, Sam Levin, Peter's Law, Max the Sax, Don in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, Calvin in Saskatoon, G in Cincinnati, Tom in Pennsylvania, Clark in New Jersey, Brian Schaefer in Illinois, Union, New Jersey, Cincinnati, Ohio, Denver, Bendigo, Australia, right? Chicago, Texas, California, Cleveland, Vallejo, California, Oslo, Norway, Chandler in Georgia, Mikey from Edinburgh, Scotland, St. David's, Bermuda, England, Arizona, Arthur Porter, welcome, welcome. Hello, Buenos Aires, Wilmington, California, Dan from Iran, Calvin from Saskatoon, Mohsen from Iran, Australia, Las Vegas, Washington State, Little Falls, New Jersey, Rusty in California, Ramiro in East LA, Liverpool, UK, Washington, Australia, Watchtower, Heathrow, Sydney, Australia, Salem, Oregon. Someone asked about Operation Gladio. That's a question I can certainly answer. Alrighty, Malaysia, Sydney, Frank from Baltimore, Tampa, Florida, Transylvania, Oahu, Austin from Massachusetts, Balthazar from Oakland, Mo from Toronto, Canada, very good. Bill from the United States, Alan Lee, Kingston, Ontario, Southern California, Rapid City, South Dakota, England. Where else? Where else? Names and locations. East Germany, Leipzig, Etatist. Very good. Very, very, very good. Who else is with us this evening? Good times. Good times. They're very good. Harold Sullivan in Naples, Florida. Chicago. New Concord, Ohio. Oshkosh, Wisconsin. Very good. Very, very good. If you haven't done so already, folks, be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to tweet this out. Be sure to make this your Facebook status. Be sure to post this on reddit.com. Round Mountain, California. Gateshead, England. Someone said they can't do super chats. It blocks them. Well, that's unbelievable. Why would you be blocked? That's crazy. Four Oaks, North Carolina. Four Oaks, North Carolina. Harold Sullivan sounds familiar. Yes, he does. He's on here a lot. On here a lot. People's Republic of China. Jenny Lynn is with us. Very good. Very, very good. Bring your friends, folks. The more people here, the more... Have you seen the new spitting image? I have not seen the new spitting image. Joanne, I have not. I'll have to check it out. That sounds interesting. I have not seen it, Joanne. If I had seen it, I would give you a much longer spiel about it, but I have not seen it, so I cannot really do that. Folks, before we get too much further, I want to let you know that I had a great chat with Ramiro Funes this afternoon. Ramiro he's watching right now. Good friend, longtime friend of mine out in Los Angeles. He does Anti-Conquista, which is a podcast. Okay. Yugoslavia. Market. Socialism versus China. Very good question. He's great. He's out in LA, and we had a great conversation about drugs and narcotics and their role in suppressing revolutionary movements. I am going to post it here on this channel just after this live broadcast is over. So be sure to check that out. It's going to be great. So that'll be good. So be sure to check it out. Ramiro has some great insights. He actually highlights a book about the drug question, and he reads from it. He brings in some very interesting facts about the drug issue. It was really just a great conversation. So if you have a chance to check it out, I really recommend it. Another thing is that, a couple lives ago, I did this whole rant about Jurassic Park and Michael Crichton and why it was that he was a climate denier and socialism as a fundamentally optimistic ideology. Because of that, I was interrupted by a lot of super chats, which is fine. Super chats are good. I like super chats, but if you want to make a flowing video. So I edited it, and I edited it together. I put in a lot of images, video, and I made it quite powerful. So it's now on this channel. So if you get a chance, share that, promote it around, because I think it'll help people understand what our community is really about. So if you see the Michael Crichton video, the Jurassic Park, Michael Crichton, Marxism and climate change video, please share it. I think it's something that people need to see. I talk about a lot of our key points that I worked in there. I talked about the Soviet Union. I talked about the body count of capitalism. I talked about so many good things. That's great. Also wanted to let folks know to mark their calendars for November 21st, because we will be having our next online conference for the Center for Political Innovation on November 21st. That is a Saturday, and that will be our next web conference for the CPI, the Center for Political Innovation. It's going to be great. The keynote speaker is going to be a friend of mine who will be talking about the concept of multilateralism, but we'll also be summing up the results of the election that just happened. It'll be quite an interesting event. We just had our first web conference for the Center for Political Innovation. It was a smashing success. Thanks to everyone who participated in it. That was tremendous. We're going to have our next web conference November 21st. It'll be happening live on this channel, but hopefully elsewhere as well. So be sure to mark your calendar and tune in. And if you want to get involved, send me an email, calebmaupin@gmail.com, first name, last name, no spaces or periods or anything like that. Send me an email, and I can, plug you into planning it. But we're gonna have yet another web conference. Our goal at this point is to do one every single month. And my feeling is that in addition to speeches, there should be music. I know that, last time we had the music of Max the Sax. He played the saxophone. He played the Internationale. And then we had the music of Jacob Maxey. He played the guitar. He played If I Had a Hammer. So, This time we're still figuring out exactly what the musical performances will be, what the speeches will be. A good friend of mine, Justin Simons, will be giving the keynote, but we're still trying to figure out the details of the meeting. So if you are wanting to help build the CPI and all of that, I encourage you to get plugged in. That's going to be good. That'll be November 21st. Also, two great friends of what we're doing here, Dust James and David Fox. They have just started their own little podcast that they're doing together. And it's great. It's called Working Class Revolt. And they just did the first episode of it tonight. Great stuff. So check out Dust James and David Fox. Great podcast they're doing. Great stuff. We have got a great community going on here, folks. We're getting on here and regularly talking about world events and politics. I often give an opening remarks. Tonight, the opening remarks were much shorter than normal because it wasn't like a planned speech. I just kind of talked about current events and old events and, just kind of talked a little bit. And then we have our roll call, which we just finished. And now we do have our super chat questions to answer. So I've got a number of super chats to get to. Okie dokie. So question number one is reparations. And I have pointed out many times that I think reparations is a good thing, but I think most people don't understand what it actually means. There's a Dave Chappelle sketch that was on it. It was on the Dave Chappelle show, and the way they portray it is everyone who is descended from slaves gets a check in the mail from the U.S. government. That is not what reparations is. The groups calling for reparations have overwhelmingly made clear that is not what they want. They do not want every person who is descended from slaves to get a check from the U.S. government. Reparations has always been, by those who call for it, that the financial institutions that benefited from slavery, such as J.P. Morgan, such as some of the major banks on Wall Street, that they should have some kind of obligation to the black community. That's what reparations actually has meant, right? Is that the corporations and financial institutions that have benefited from slavery historically, that built themselves up from slavery, have an obligation to the black community. Let's not forget, why is it Wall Street? Right? It's not named after Mr. Wall, right? There was no Mr. Wall it's named after. Wall Street was a slave market. That's why it was a wall, right? There was a wall there to keep the slaves from escaping, and there was a slave auction block in Wall Street. Let's not forget that. Furthermore, let's also not forget that they actually discovered an African burial ground on Wall Street. In Lower Manhattan, there was a cemetery for slaves, and they've actually turned it into a museum now. So, a lot of Wall Street banks were very supportive of slavery. And that didn't just, that wasn't just, before the American Revolution. Up into the Civil War, New York City was a stronghold of pro-slavery sentiments during the Civil War in the North. Why? Because Wall Street was involved in insurance, right? Wall Street would insure not just slave ships, right, because they stopped importing slaves in 1800, but Wall Street insured the slave exports, right? Wall Street was very key in insuring the cotton exports that went to Britain and built up the British textile industry. Wall Street was very key in financing a lot of slave operations and lending money, and that Wall Street, the Lower Manhattan financial district, was very pro-slavery during the U.S. Civil War. Now, that's not widely discussed, but it is a fact. And actually, I did not come up with this. But it's a very provocative statement that was made by a friend of mine years ago. And he said, can you imagine a situation where in New York City, right, a lot of working class people who didn't want to fight in a war were going around the city protesting. And they went to the homes of rich people who supported the war and burned down their homes. And they went out and burned their draft cards. And they and they refused to fight in the war, and they went after the richest people in the city who supported the war. Could you imagine such a situation in New York City where Marxists wouldn't support it? Yes, that would be the Civil War, right? Because during the Civil War, there was an event called the Draft Riots. And what it was Wall Street, the Wall Street bankers who wanted slavery to stay intact, saw that there were a lot of very, very low-income Irish people who did not know there was a war going on in the United States, got off the boat, and they said, great, you're here in the United States in a new country. Bill of Rights Socialist. Yeah, you're here in the United States in a new country. You can go fight in the Civil War. And they were immediately drafted, and they didn't know what the Civil War was about, and so they were angry about it. So Wall Street bankers stirred them up and unleashed them to go riot and burn the homes of anti-slavery activists in New York City. And yes, it was a lot of working class Irish people who were, against the war, didn't want to fight in the war, but they were being duped and manipulated by the Wall Street bankers who were in league with the Southern plantation owners. And in addition to burning the homes of rich people in New York City who opposed slavery, on top of that, they burned the homes of black people, and they lynched black people and murdered black people. And they went after the New York Tribune, which was the newspaper that supported Karl Marx. They burned a black orphanage, says J. Marie London. I believe that's true. So, it shows that sometimes things can get confusing in the class struggle. All right, there's no way that any progressive person could have supported the draft riots of New York City during the Civil War. They were racist riots. They were targeting black people. They were pro-slavery, and the whole thing was being organized by Wall Street bankers. But on the surface of it, right, that's been a mantra of the revolutionary left, for a long time, right? We don't want the workers to go fight in the rich man's war. On the surface of it, they looked like something progressive. But if you looked at the content of the draft riots, they were reactionary riots. And the draft riots, were horrific. And, the New York City Police Department and the U.S. National Guard were absolutely right to put down those draft riots. Now, that doesn't mean, though, that the way the low-income Irish people were being treated, in the U.S. military was good. It certainly was not good, right? And that, we know the Irish immigrants were often put on the front lines and sent to die. They were discriminated against. So it's a complicated situation, and that goes to point out that in contradictions there are sometimes there are sometimes things that make it all complicated, right? If you talked to somebody, right, who was a low-income Irish person, they'd come to the United States, they get off the boat, a gun is shoved into their hand, and they're sent into the U.S. military to die. They don't know why they're there, and so they decide they're going to riot against the draft. If you talked to just that person, what might you think about the U.S. Civil War? But you have to realize that's only one person's perspective. It's not the whole big picture. And what they told you about how they were discriminated against in the U.S. military might be true. What they told you about how it was unfair, that as soon as they got to the United States, they were being forcibly conscripted into a war they had nothing to do with, that might be true. That didn't change the situation that slavery was evil and had to be destroyed, and that the draft riots were, a manipulation to serve the interests of the southern slave owners and the big Wall Street bankers and the British Empire, right? Brown berets, right? So you have to remember that. There's a lot of people who think they can understand a big international event by talking to one person who was there, right? I've heard this so much. People are like, I know everything I need to know about communism in Cuba because I talked to this guy down the street from me whose dad fled in 1959 when Castro came to power. Well, I'm sorry, that guy, his dad has one perspective. Cuba is a big country with millions of people in it. And is it true that what happened to this guy's dad when Castro came to power may have been wrong? Yes. Just like it was true that Irish person who got off the boat and got drafted and got discriminated against in the army for being Catholic or whatever, it might be true, but one person's experience does not define all of reality. Okay? Like this is something that people don't seem to grasp, right? And that the U.S. Civil War Abraham Lincoln was absolutely right to smash slavery. Karl Marx was absolutely right to support Abraham Lincoln in it. Harriet Tubman was absolutely right to be the first woman to lead soldiers into battle. However, were there things on the other side of the contradiction that, take, for example, was at the same time the United States was putting down the slaveholders' insurrection, was it not oppressing Native Americans? Yes, it was. Did that make it wrong for them to defeat the slaveholders? No. That in contradictory situations, you can have bad and good on both sides, but what is the primary contradiction? What is the primary contradiction? Right? And in the Civil War, the issue was, would slavery continue or would it not continue? Would the British Empire be able to continue making lots of money from exploiting the free labor of African slaves in the U.S. South and getting, cotton to run their textile mills, or would slavery be abolished and the United States be allowed to industrialize? Right? Would the slave system of the South remain intact or not? That was the issue. That was the issue, and it was resolved, and it's very clear that Abraham Lincoln was right and Jefferson Davis was wrong. Okay, but does that mean everything Lincoln did was good? No. Does that mean that there weren't people that were hurt on the Union side of the Civil War? Of course not, right? And that's what these people don't get, right? Is it possible that the Syrian government has done a lot of bad things over the years? I'm sure, right? I'm sure there's a lot of corruption, a lot of poverty. In the developing world, when you have a government that comes in, there's going to be situations. But does that mean that the Wahhabi extremists being backed by the U.S. government that want to destroy Syria and reduce it to sectarian chaos due to Syria, what was done to Libya or Iraq, does that mean that they're right? Of course not, right? And that's what these folks don't get, is that the world is often far more complicated than American media would like you to think it is. American media wants to make everything simple, right? The USA just goes around spreading human rights. That's not the case, right? That is not the case at all. The world is far, far more complicated, and I hope that you can come to understand that. Okay, that started out being a question about reparations. Should Holocaust denial be allowed on Twitter? Well, here's the thing. The Holocaust is one of the most well-documented events in all of human history. All right? The Nazis were proud of what they did. They were proud of it. They were proud of it. Okay. We'll tell who I voted for. All right. They were proud. The Nazis were very proud of what they did. And Holocaust denial is idiotic. I'm sorry. Oh my goodness, right? I could start telling you some of the stupid things that Holocaust deniers say, but I'm not going to do that because I'd really like to monetize this video. So I'm not going to get into detail about this. But that said, right, here's the thing, right? They've already started doing this. That if you question... So we all know the Holocaust happened. The Nazis bragged about doing the Holocaust. They documented it very well. The Holocaust is a historical fact. However, right, because there are Holocaust deniers out there, they have started to create this situation where, because we all agree that Holocaust deniers are bad people. I missed a super chat. What did I miss here? Going up. All right. Caste system imposed by the Spanish. All right. Right? Because of that, they've created a situation where somehow you're not allowed to question Communist parties in Mexico. Somehow you're not allowed to question other allegations made by the U.S. imperialists because of the Holocaust. Even though IBM funded the punch card machines, ran the punch card machines for the Holocaust, even though, the U.S. government was not anti-Nazi, even though it accused people who were anti-Nazi of being, quote, premature anti-fascists, somehow people have it in their minds that they have created this weird situation where questioning any allegation made in U.S. media against any anti-imperialist government is the same as questioning the Holocaust. And it's not, right? I mean, the Holocaust happened many, many years ago. It's well documented. It's been investigated. I mean, we all know it happened. End of story. But, you know, there are events happening right now that there's a lot of confusion about. And there's a lot of debate about it, and there's not a consensus. And there are certain forces that very much want to make it as if there is a consensus. And then if you question anything in the narrative of U.S. media about events that are happening right now, you are then equated with a Holocaust denier. And that's a very dangerous precedent. So on that basis, I don't want to give Twitter the ability to, right? I mean, I think that, I mean, as much as I hate Holocaust deniers, as much as I don't agree with them at all, I think that I don't trust the Silicon Valley fascists. I don't trust them to decide what historical events I'm allowed to question and not. So based on that, you know, I'm sorry, I think that Twitter needs to not have that kind of power. It's not a question of supporting Holocaust deniers at all. I do not support Holocaust deniers. It's a question of not trusting them and seeing how this slippery slope is already being used, right? I mean, no, you all saw my debate with Vosh. Vosh thinks that if you question anything U.S. media says about China, or anything U.S. media says about Syria, or anything U.S. media says with Iraq, you're the same as a Holocaust denier. You saw it, right? He, you know, I said that we don't have all the facts about China, and based on that, he tried to paint me as if I am the equivalent of a Nazi. Now, that is crazy, but that's how the Silicon Valley fascists and the Twitter folks think. That's what they think, right? That, you know, the USA just goes around spreading human rights, and all anti-imperialist states are just like Hitler, and the USA has to intervene to stop. I mean, this is how they think. So should we allow people that think like that to have that kind of power? No, we shouldn't. No, we shouldn't, right? People should be able to ask questions. And, you know, this isn't like we have the power, right? It's not like we're in charge of Twitter and we decide. No, right? The Silicon Valley fascists have the power. They decide who gets to go on Twitter. We don't, right? And they are pro-imperialist. They want to destabilize anti-imperialist countries. They have reduced Libya to crisis, to rubble, and are responsible for all kinds of deaths there. They reduced Syria to civil war, right? Twitter was fully on board with the Hillary Clinton State Department. You know, it's all proven. You know, we had Jared Andrew Cohen from Google. Google Alphabet was working with the State Department. He told Twitter... He actually went to Twitter without the permission of Barack Obama. This was all published in the New Yorker, and told them to not do a planned shutdown so that Twitter could be utilized to destabilize Iran for protests. Right? He did this without the permission of Barack Obama, and Hillary Clinton brags about this to the New Yorker. And you know, Google, Facebook, Twitter, they were all on board to help the Arab Spring happen. And what has been the results of the Arab Spring? Right? What has been the results? You know, how many Libyans have died? How many Syrians have died or become refugees? I mean, people are drowning in the Mediterranean, you know, trying to get out of Libya because of the hell capitalism has created. So, you know, I mean, Bahrain was invaded by the Saudi military, and they beat back the population and reinstalled the brutal monarchy. You know, all kinds of horrendous things happened as a result of the Arab Spring. You know, and Twitter and Facebook, and they were all on board with that. They were coordinating with the State Department and Al Jazeera, and they made it happen. They made the videos go viral. They did it, right? They did it. So why should we trust these very, very evil people to decide what we are and what we are not allowed to say? Okay? Why should we trust these very, very evil people at Silicon Valley, you know, they're running the social media and coordinating with the U.S. State Department, to be able to decide what we have to say? That's my only point, right? If it was about giving the power to some just body, right? If it was like if we elected the heads of Twitter or something, maybe I would be in favor of banning Holocaust deniers because they disgust me and because they're, you know, Holocaust deniers particularly annoy me. You know why? Because they use them against, there's nothing there, okay? Trust me, they have no argument, right? They have nothing. They have nothing, okay? Like, if you look into it, like, I mean, I don't want to get into the details because I'd like to not have this video be demonetized. But, you know, like, I'm sorry, but they have nothing. They got nothing, okay? But then they are the point of reference for any questioning of the mainstream media. If you say, hey, you know, the Soviet Union, I've gotten this my whole life. You say, hey, you know, the Soviet Union, they were the first country in outer space. They wiped out illiteracy. And then people, I've had this happen to me. People then say to me, oh, and I bet the Holocaust didn't happen either. Like, how does that make any sense? I don't know. But that's what, you know, their existence, the Holocaust deniers' existence has done. Right? I don't know how people make that leap, but it's like we all agree Hitler's a bad guy, and we're all supposed to agree that Stalin was a bad guy. So anyone who says anything good about the Soviet Union under Stalin is the same as anyone who says the Holocaust didn't happen. It doesn't make any sense, right? But they've created this. This is what liberalism has done. This is what the liberal propaganda order has done, is they equate any questioning of their narrative with people that say idiotic things, you know, with Holocaust deniers. So, because of that, you know, I don't trust Twitter to go ahead and ban people for what they say about historical events, unfortunately, because that's just how it works. I mean, I don't trust the folks at Twitter, right? And honestly, though, you know, I would encourage people to. Do you think the tech leaders are all bad? Yes, I'm sure every single person there has no, I'm sure there's great people in Silicon Valley. I'm sure there's great people. I'm just warning you. And I've warned you many times. There's a lot of libertarian objectivists there. There's a lot of Malthusians there. But yeah, I'm sure there's good people who work on Silicon Valley. I'm sure every person who works at every tech giant is, you know, come on. All right. I spent way too much time answering that question. All right. Are autistic people an oppressed group? I don't know. I mean, I had a very good friend in college who was autistic, and he was very much involved in like autistic activism. You know, but it's a spectrum, isn't it? Like my understanding of it, I'm not an expert on these issues at all, but my understanding of the autism thing is it's a spectrum, right? There are some people who are like completely disabled, and there are other people who, you know, their personality is a little quirky or something, and it's a spectrum, right? Not everyone who is on the autism spectrum is the same way, right? I understand that there are varying degrees of autism, right? So if one was to declare that autistic people were an oppressed group, right, that would kind of be putting them all in the same category because they're all very different from what I understand. There are different, it's a spectrum, right? There are different types of people on that spectrum. Furthermore, right, then there's the whole issue of like, you know, some people that are autistic consider themselves or are considered by society to be disabled, right? And people that are disabled are already considered an oppressed group, right? So why would we make a separate oppressed group for people that are autistic unless, right, there are people that are autistic that are not disabled. They're able to, you know, live a normal life, work a normal job. They just they're neurodivergent, as they say. So the question is, you know, I don't even know. You know, I really don't know enough about the issue, honestly. I don't know enough about autism or neurodiversity or whatever. But it's an interesting question. Is it wrong for leftists and communists to join the U.S. military for money and their university paid for? Okay. Okay. Writing it down. So I don't really know enough about that issue, right? You know, I mean, talk to a neurologist perhaps, or talk to somebody in one of these autistic organizations or someone who identifies as autistic and has made that their cause. Maybe they could answer that question, but I'm not here to speak for the autistic community, and I certainly just don't know enough about the issue. So thanks for asking, but yeah, are they an oppressed group? I mean, there's the disabled community. They definitely consider themselves to be an oppressed group. But then there's an autism spectrum, from what I understand. I don't know enough about it. That's all I'll say. I don't know enough about it. All right. All righty. Next question. All righty. All righty. Is the liberal international order coming to an end? I mean, I don't know if it's coming to an end. It's certainly in crisis, right? I mean, we can see that in the United States. We can see that in Britain. We can see that in France. It's certainly in crisis, but coming to an end would mean it was like, you know, fading out. I don't see it fading out. I mean, it's certainly well intact. It's just in crisis, right? I mean, it's not working. It's in shambles. But there's a difference between being in crisis and being widely questioned and facing strong opposition, you know, and actually being on its way out. So I wouldn't say it's on its way out. I mean, in a dialectical sense, I think, globally, I mean, I would say it's on its way out eventually, but I don't see it coming to an end at the moment. I see it in crisis, right? I do think that a new form of globalization in which countries trade with each other on the basis of win-win cooperation is eventually going to emerge and replace the liberal international order. But at the moment, the liberal international order is very well intact, but it's facing lots of opposition and it's facing a crisis. All right, China and Muslims. Well, look, all religions were mistreated in China during the Cultural Revolution. Right, there were a lot of temples that were destroyed, a lot of mosques that were destroyed, and that was not just in Tibet and the Uyghur regions. That was also in the Chinese mainland. A lot of churches were destroyed, and that's wrong. And the Chinese Communist Party in the 1980s published a very important document on the history of how religious people were treated in the country and repudiated a lot of that and made a point of saying that religious people need to have their rights respected. They need to have their rights respected more, and that, big mistakes have been made by the Chinese Communist Party in regards to not just Muslims, but in regards to all religious groups in China, right? And that's wrong. They even went after Confucius. The Gang of Four went after Confucius, right? They had this campaign called Criticize Lin Biao, Criticize Confucius. And they went around burning the writings of Confucius and attacking Confucianism. And Confucius is considered like the father of Chinese civilization. So, mistakes have definitely been made in how Muslims have been treated in China. There's no question about it. However, right now, the Chinese Communist Party is building mosques. It's funding seminaries. It's doing its best to isolate what it calls, folks that would engage in like the knife attacks and stuff. It's trying to isolate terrorism, but at the same time, the Chinese Communist Party is trying its best to cultivate and facilitate, imams and religious leaders who are not advocates of terrorism and are in favor of helping the Chinese Communist Party to build a prosperous socialist society. So not all Muslims in China are the same, right? There are different, like just like everywhere, right? There's different types of Christians. There's different types of Muslims, right? I'm not in a position to tell anybody who is a real Muslim and who isn't because I'm not a Muslim. But there are different types of Islam. There are different religious groups in China. There are Muslims in China, a lot of them. The Chinese Communist Party is trying to repair that relationship right now. There may be things they're doing right now that is not okay. But it seems to me like a lot of progress has been made. And that, I've read all about the mosques the Chinese Communist Party is building, the mosques, the seminaries for Muslim imams. And so it's more complicated than you would think, right? People want to make it sound like it's all one way. Things are, as I said, often much more complicated. Operation Gladio. All right. Coming out of World War II in Italy, the Communist Party was very, very, very popular. The Communist Party of Italy had formed the partisan brigades that were the resistance to the fascists, right? I don't know if folks know the song. It was actually a popular song. It's still sung by communists. It was sung by the Italian partisan brigades. Soy comunista, toda la vida. Bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, 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 soy comunista, toda la vida, y comunista, da, da, da. Right, yeah, and it was the song of the Italian partisan brigades, that as the Mussolini fascist regime was collapsing, the communists formed these armed resistance groups that were like the heroes. They were like the Robin Hoods of Italy. They were just loved by everybody in Italy. So after the Second World War was over, there was a feeling that the Communist Party of Italy might win the elections. And so the CIA launched Operation Gladio to try and prevent the Communist Party from getting elected. And because of that, there was all kinds of crazy stuff that went on, right? There were like fascist groups that got support from the CIA to kill communists. There were ultra-leftist terrorist groups that engaged in violence while being covertly supported by the CIA, and that was like to discredit communists to the Italian public. You know, all kinds of weird stuff was done to try and prevent the Italian people from ever electing a communist government in Italy. And it worked, I guess. I mean, the Communist Party was a big part of Italy post-World War II. I mean, many seats, many regions where it was very popular. But it worked. Ultimately, the big thing was when in 1978, the the Italian Communist Party joined with the Spanish Communist Party and the French Communist Party in becoming Euro-communists and cutting their ties to the Soviet Union. I think that was, and that there was a lot of work covertly that was done by the United States and British intelligence to help facilitate that political break. When the Italian Communist Party and the French Communist Party and the Spanish Communist Party cut their ties to the Soviet Union in 1978, that was pretty big. All right. Amlo. Alrighty. Okay. Yugoslav market socialism versus Chinese market socialism. That's a very good question. So, Yugoslavia, 1948, they cut ties to the Soviet Union. Yugoslavia became the first socialist country to align with the United States. 1948, Yugoslavia and the Soviet Union had their falling out. So Tito tried to give the impression that he was a more revolutionary socialist than Stalin. And so he instituted this policy called like worker self-management, it was called, where basically every factory was autonomous, right? So every factory would produce its goods, and then the government would buy the goods from the factory. And it seemed on the surface, right, it looked so revolutionary, right? No one tells the workers run the factory all by themselves, right? No one tells them what to produce, but they sell the goods, right? And they all share in the profits. Sounds very egalitarian. However, what it did was it weakened Falun Gong Parade in my hometown. Sorry to hear that. Yeah, I guess I'll put this on the list of things to talk about. All right, Falun Gong Parade. All right. So it was called worker self-management. And on the surface, it looked really revolutionary. But in practice, what it did was it resulted in dividing the population. Some regions produced more than other regions, right? Because you can't have the exact same number of factories in every region that you have in every other region. And however, obviously, these workers, what about their health care, right? I mean, they're not going to just, they're not going to have private health care. So they're all paying into the same health care plan. They're all paying into the same, like building roads. So by having worker self-management, as Tito called it, it created a situation where the workers in different regions resented each other. And they felt like, hey, we're working really, really hard, but we have to pay out of what we did in this factory to pay for those freeloaders in this other region and that went on. It had a divisive role. What was interesting was that the quote-unquote worker self-management in Yugoslavia, you didn't have like Western companies setting up shop. At least you didn't have that for a while, right? In the 50s, 60s, you didn't really have that. I mean, it was still Yugoslav-owned factories. It was just they were autonomous. But it weakened the state central planning. I don't think it was a good move, honestly. And I think it created an opening for there to be more ethnic divisions. You have to remember that, in China, there are minorities, national minorities, but for the most part, the population is the same nationality, right? There are Tibetans, there are Uyghurs, there are some other national minorities. But for the most part, you have a very, very, large national majority, right? Whereas Yugoslavia, it's not like that, right? It's a union of Slavic peoples, and there's Croatians and Macedonians and Serbs and Slovenians, and it's a very, very diverse group of people, and that those ethnic tensions existed. And so, that's a very different situation. Now, what China did originally, and this is very interesting, they started doing something kind of like that worker self-management stuff in Mao's China, right? So there was the January storm, right, during the Cultural Revolution, where Shanghai in China became a commune state. They overthrew the elected government and the Communist Party, and they declared Shanghai to be the Shanghai Commune. And Lin Biao supported it and said that all the cities throughout China should become autonomous communes. Mao opposed that. He said that that was too dangerous. It would give way to Bonapartism and anarchy. And Mao opposed the Shanghai Commune. And instead, Mao instituted what he called the 3-in-1 combination. And you can Google this, the 3-in-1 combination. And during the Cultural Revolution, the way factories in China were managed after the January storm was that every factory was run by what they called a 3-in-1 combination, which was you would have one elected representative of the workers, one political representative of the Communist Party, and one technical representative who was like an engineer or someone who was responsible for making sure who had the technical knowledge. And it was that 3-in-1 combination, right? The technical person, the representative of the workers, and the political representative of the Communist Party that would oversee every factory. And that's how things were done. Now, towards the end of the Cultural Revolution, they started, allowing, the 3-in-1 combination, right, to give way to a situation where workers had different shares of ownership, right? And it was actually, interestingly, what started later with the market reforms in Deng Xiaoping and the free market zones. In a way, there was the beginnings of that during the late Gang of Four period. And, it was like, these factories where every worker would have a share. It was kind of like they were separate from the state central plan. And it's kind of fascinating. Read about it. But the late Cultural Revolution, in the name of being ultra-revolutionary, started to, lay the basis for some of the market reforms that came later. So it's a very different situation. Tito instituting worker self-management in the 1950s versus what happened in China with the Shanghai Commune and the January storm, and then the 3-in-1 combination, and then the Deng Xiaoping market reforms, reform and opening up in 1978. That's completely different situation. But it's good that you asked. Anyway, all right, next question. All righty. Bill of Rights Socialism. Well, Bill of Rights Socialism is a term developed by the late Gus Hall. Gus Hall was leader of the Communist Party USA, and he argued that because so many working class people in the United States are convinced that communism would take away their freedom, Gus Hall argued that the program of the Communist Party USA should be called Bill of Rights Socialism so that everybody knew they weren't going to take away people's freedom. That was the idea. Thank you, Caleb, for your continued insights and expertise in illuminating the development of socialism throughout the world. Thank you for engaging in the critical development of modern theory in the United States. Thank you, Justin Simons. I'm looking forward to your presentation on multilateralism, and it should be good. November 21st, Justin will be giving a great presentation about multilateralism and the changing global stage. But yeah, Bill of Rights Socialism. That was Gus Hall, leader of the Communist Party. He argued that in order to make clear that communism was not about taking away freedom, that it was necessary for the Communist Party USA to refer to its program as Bill of Rights Socialism. And, they actually have a pamphlet. I remember getting copies of it, Bill of Rights Socialism USA. And that was Gus Hall. It's a good concept. I think it's a little outdated because now we have Bernie Sanders and we have democratic socialism, and that I don't think people, when they hear the term socialism, immediately think of communist dictatorship. I do think, though, I in a way, I'm similar to Gus Hall, where he argues that we need to develop a uniquely American socialism, and that's important. But at the same time, I'm not sure Bill of Rights Socialism is the way we would want to put it today. It's good. It's good. See, Gus Hall, here's what you have to understand, okay? Gus Hall, because the Communist Party USA was the Soviet-aligned party, They were held to a higher standard of political professionalism than other communist parties in the United States, right? They were aligned with the Soviet Union, and because of that, they were never going to write books. The simplest way to, all right, writing it down. They were never going to write books that were crazy. Wait, right? They were never going to write books. I mean, they were kind of, they even though they never really, during the Cold War, I mean, in the 1930s, they were a massive party. But even though during the 50s and 60s and 70s, they were never a huge political party, they were forced to act like they were. The statements that they would give, were very responsibly worded. Their election platforms, if you look at Gus Hall's like election speeches, they were forced to act in a more politically mature way than a lot of the ultra-leftist groups were because they were a serious political party. And that's why I really do. I have Gus Hall's writings up here. I have, Imperialism Today and Fighting Racism and, Basics for Peace, Democracy, and Jobs and, I'm Working Class USA. Gus Hall's writings is very good because it's much more professional, right? It's not the ramblings of Bob Avakian. It's not the ramblings of some Trotskyite like James Cannon. I mean, it's much more professional because they were, even though they didn't really have a mass following post 1950s, they had to act like it, right? They were kind of required to act like a real political party. Because they had the franchise, the Soviet franchise. That's really valuable. And so, like, Gus Hall understood that, that in order to get people in the United States to understand socialism, they couldn't go around saying they wanted to copy the Soviet system. They had to say that they advocated a uniquely American socialism. And the term that the Communist Party USA developed for their uniquely American socialism was, quote, Bill of Rights socialism. I talk about socialism with American characteristics. I talk about, American socialism. I talk about a government of action that fights for working families. But, that showed, again, a level of political maturity on the part of the Communist Party. I'm sorry, but like communists in Brazil don't say F Brazil, right? Because they're running for the presidency of Brazil. Communists in Indonesia do not say F Indonesia, okay? Communists in the United States, I don't know what it is, they're going to burn the flag. They're going to tell all the population that they're racist white settlers who need to be deported. They're going to give the middle finger to most of the country, and somehow they're going to win. Yeah, it's kind of sad. I watched ContraPoint's video urging people to vote for Biden, and my head wanted to explode because, I'm not supporting Biden, but ContraPoints is ripping to shreds some of the dumbest arguments from people, right? I'm not supporting Biden because I'm not sure he's better than Trump. I'm not sure that Biden is better than Trump. He might be. In some ways he is, but in some ways he's worse, right? I've done videos, who's behind Joe Biden? I've talked about the ultra-rich and the managerial bourgeoisie and how dangerous they are, right? So, that's my concern, and that wasn't addressed in her video. Her video was like addressing people who were saying, oh, we don't need to vote for Biden. We need to have an armed communist revolution. And it's dumb stuff like that. And you watch it, and it's like, ContraPoints is shilling for Biden and urging you to vote for Biden, and she's smarter than these people that are just kind of like, I'm not going to vote, I'm going to revolt. Woo! And it's like, you look at the arguments she's dismantling, and it's like, why does she look smart when she's making an argument I'm disagreeing with? Because the argument that she's up against, your typical internet ultra-leftist is just, oh boy, oh boy, So that's all enough I need to say about that. Anyway, all right, Brown Berets. Well, they were an organization that was formed of Chicano Americans, if I'm not mistaken, right? They were the Chicano Americans of the Southwest. Who felt that the people of the Southwest, constituted a nation. They wanted independence for Aztlan. They were inspired by the Black Panthers. They were part of that Rainbow Coalition that was built by Fred Hampton, and part of the theory the Black Panthers developed called intercommunalism, the idea that every nationality would have its own revolutionary organizations. Eventually, they would form a united front. And the Brown Berets were for Chicanos. There was the Young Lords that was for Puerto Rican Americans. There was even a group called the Young Patriots, that was formed among low-income white Americans. They used the Confederate flag as their symbol. I'm not in favor of using the Confederate flag, but it's quite interesting. And there was the Young Patriots, and there was the the Gay Liberation Front for LGBT folks, and it was pretty fascinating. And the Brown Berets, I believe, they were involved in what was called the Chicano Moratorium, which was a big demonstration of Chicano students, all throughout the Southwest, Arizona, New Mexico, Southern California. And they talked about, these folks, right? They're most of them, had lived in the area that they were in for hundreds of years, right? There's a chant that Chicanos would chant: "We didn't cross the border crossed us." Right? They lived there, right? And that was part of Mexico. It was seized by the United States, and there were thousands and thousands and millions of people who lived there at the time it was seized by the United States from Mexico. And then they were treated as foreigners in their own country. There were mass deportations. There were many times during the Great Depression where they would just forcibly deport people, to Mexico because, oh, you speak another language. Their language, they spoke Spanish in their households, still do, and their language was beaten out of them in schools, right? The teachers, if they heard any student speaking Spanish, they would paddle them and spank them, if they spoke their own language, they would have their own language beaten out of them. It was awful. The Chicano people have suffered horrendously. And I think it was in 1969, there was a huge demonstration, right, in the United States against the Vietnam War, called the Moratorium. It was like a national strike, like a one-day strike against the Vietnam War. And then after that, I believe on the same day, there was what was called the Chicano Moratorium, which was the Chicano people. They had a mass protest and strike on the same day, but the issue was, from what I understand, and I need to be more up on this. I haven't spent a lot of time in the Southwest. I really haven't. So I'm not an expert on this. Somebody from Arizona. I ought to interview somebody from Arizona or New Mexico or Southern California about this. I haven't spent a lot of time in that area, but from my understanding, the Chicano moratorium was a mass outpouring specifically about the rights of the Chicano people. And it was a huge mobilization of many, many, many thousands of people in the Southwest. So, that's what the Brown Berets were, from my understanding. It was a revolutionary movement among the Chicano people, aligned with the Black Panthers. Will I tell who I voted for after the election? No, but I've told you all many times, I'm not supporting and I will not vote for Joe Biden, and I'm not supporting and I will not vote for Donald Trump. And I've made that abundantly clear. I am not supporting either of the major candidates. I am not going to vote for either of the major candidates. I will vote for one of the third-party candidates, and I cannot tell you which one of the third-party candidates it would be, because I am a journalist, and that would bias my journalism and my reporting. If I were to get up here and tell you which candidate I was planning to vote for, then I would not be able to objectively report on the candidates in the election. So because of that, no, I will not tell you which of the third-party candidates I am voting for. But I will not be voting for Joe Biden, and I will not be voting for Donald Trump. And at the end of the day, even if I did vote for one of those two, it wouldn't make any gosh darn difference, because I live here in Brooklyn, and in New York State, it's going to go for Biden anyway, right? So even if I don't vote for anybody, it doesn't make any gosh darn difference because of this awful system we have in the United States called the Electoral College. The Electoral College has rendered my vote irrelevant, right? And it has rendered the votes of all kinds of people around the country pretty much irrelevant. Unless you live in a battleground state, could Sam Cedar beat Chuck Schumer in 2020? I don't know. I don't count on it. I don't know. Okay. Sam Cedar, Chuck Schumer. All right. But yeah, unless you live in a battleground state. If you live in a solidly red or solidly blue state, Kanye West, JK, ha ha ha, right? Chuck Schumer, right? Unless you live in a state that's solidly red or solidly blue, your vote really doesn't count in the United States. The Electoral College basically renders you irrelevant. So people in Pennsylvania, people in Wisconsin, people in Ohio, people in Michigan, people in Florida, you're the ones who really will make the difference in this upcoming election, right? But people like me in New York, forget it. People in California, forget it. People in Texas, forget it. People in Alabama, forget it. Right? And this is supposed to be the height of democracy, right? Last time, folks will recall, Donald Trump did not get the majority of the votes. More people voted for Hillary Clinton than voted for Donald Trump, and Donald Trump still won. Keep that in mind. And if you're in Puerto Rico, it doesn't matter who you vote for. Washington, D.C., doesn't matter who you vote for. If you're in Guam, doesn't matter who you vote for. Virgin Islands, doesn't matter who you vote for, right? But this is the most democratic country. Imagine that in Russia, imagine this, right? Russia, it's the Russian Federation, mind you, right? The Russian Federation. Imagine that Russia picked certain parts of the Russian Federation and they didn't have any say in who the president was. Imagine that, right? Imagine that, that would be an outrage, right? We would say, the Russian imperialists are exploiting. Every presidential election comes along, and the people of Puerto Rico have no say in who gets to be president, their president. And we go, okay, whatever, that's American democracy. People in Guam, no say. People in Washington, D.C., no say. Right? People in Virgin Islands, no say. This is, but we're the most democratic country in the world. Meanwhile, right, with the Electoral College, if you're in a state that is overwhelmingly red or blue, your vote doesn't really matter. Right? And Donald Trump, the majority of people who voted in the 2016 election voted for the other candidate, Hillary Clinton, and Donald Trump still won. But the USA is the ultra-democratic country, mind you. And the USA, not only does it get to beat its chest about we're the most free country in the world, not only that, but the United States then gets to invade other countries for not being democratic enough, right? Now, you want to explain to me how that's legit, right? Explain to me how that's legit, right? That, Venezuela can elect Hugo Chavez with every international monitor there. The Carter Center can be there. The Organization for American States, the European Union, they can all be there and say, you know what? Hugo Chavez won this election. And American media can be like, no, he didn't. He's a communist dictator. And he didn't win because he's a communist dictator, because he's a communist. And that's just supposed to mean, and then everyone goes, yep, Chavez is a brutal dictator. It's unbelievable. It is unbelievable. It is unbelievable. It is unbelievable. In the United States, we have our election on Tuesday. On a Tuesday. And that Tuesday is not a national holiday. Kids don't get off school that day. Most jobs don't give you the day off. So keep that in mind. We don't have it on a weekend, and we don't have it on a national holiday. We have it on a Tuesday. And there are big lines in the morning to vote before work, big lines in the evening to vote after work. And it's by law, it must be a Tuesday that we have our election. But we are the height of democracy. It's a joke. It's a joke. It is a joke. It is an absolute joke. And the arrogance, this neocon arrogance, this is the greatest country in the world, and every other country is a brutal dictatorship, and we got to invade them and give them freedom, and if you don't like it here, move to another country. Shut up. Give me a break. We have an electoral system that, it looks almost like it's designed, to make sure that your vote has as little impact as possible. It's like it's set up to keep you from voting because they have it on a work day. Plus, all the things I just went over. Plus, all the people that, are in U.S. territories or Washington, D.C. have no say. Plus, the fact that the Electoral College renders your vote, irrelevant unless you're in a certain area. But this is the height of democracy. And if you question this, your RT reports get labeled by Twitter as somehow, civic disinfo or something. I mean, this is ridiculous. It's infuriating. Infuriates me. And infuriates me absolutely. Absolutely. And the fact that we're all, I mean, look at this. I mean, the whole country. I saw today. I turn on the TV. I see that the Guardian Angels, this like vigilante right-wing group, are like patrolling the streets on election night in case there's rioting after the election. And oh my goodness, I mean, it's like, and people are all afraid. If Trump loses, there's going to be riots. If Trump wins, there's going to be riots. I mean, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Reform or revolution? All right, I got it. All right, I'm sorry. Sorry, folks, getting a little worked up here, but it's like, give me a break. I just wish this election could be over with. Seriously, I really am not thrilled about this election. Alrighty. The caste system imposed by the Spanish. Yes, when in the age of Spanish colonialism, there were different privileges given to people. Trump relationship to Kim Jong-un versus Biden. Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I mean, there was the caste system, right? The way that Spanish colonialist caste system worked was the lighter you are, the better you are, right? The highest up were the Spanish folks who were the lightest skinned. There was people of mixed race. There were the indigenous people. There were the descendants of African slaves. And it still has an impact, right? In a lot of Latin America, the richest people tend to be the lightest skinned. The poorest people tend to be the darkest skinned. And it's a little bit different. Here in the United States, the way racism tends to work is you're white or you're black, right? They talk about the one drop theory, right? Somebody can be of mixed race or whatever, but as far as society is concerned, one drop and you're black. In Latin America, it's a little bit different, right? Because of the historic mestizo system. Why doesn't Trump fix what Bolton broke with DPRK? All right. All right. Bolton. Okie dokie. Alrighty. Communist parties in Mexico. All right. Well, it's interesting. I don't know in great depth the communist parties in Mexico. I do know that the official, like, bona fide, like, pro-Soviet communist party was called the Popular Socialist Party, I believe. There is a group called the Communist Party of Mexico, and that is an anti-revisionist grouping. That they are like ML, like Maoists, I believe, or anti-revisionists, like of some stripe, Enver Hoxha, or they're anti-revisionists. That's the Communist Party of Mexico. And that there's also a party in Mexico called the Party of Labor, and that party is probably the biggest communist party in Mexico. Is called the Party of Labor, the Labor Party, the PT, right? Party Trabajadores, I believe, and it's part of the ruling coalition with AMLO, right? AMLO's coalition, Morena or whatever, the PT is part of it. And that the PT, interestingly, they were split from the Communist Party. They were Maoists, then they were followers of Albania, and then they just became kind of 21st century socialists. They are the biggest party, and they historically were Maoists, but then they just kind of became a general communist party in Mexico, and they are the biggest communist party in Mexico. There are some Trotskyite groups in Mexico that have a presence. There's the Zapatistas, which are like kind of anarchists, kind of indigenous separatists that are in Chiapas. And yeah, that's left politics in Mexico. That I'm aware of. I remember I did meet with different groups, the Popular Socialist Party, the Communist Party of Mexico. So there you go. All righty. AMLO. Well, AMLO, is is the president of Mexico. He ran a couple times, and the election was probably stolen from him. But Trump's presidency created a situation where Amlo was able to win because I think it created enough distance between Mexico and the United States that the forces that would have worked to rig it against Amlo were not willing to do so. Lopez Obrador, right? He's the president. Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, he's the Mexican president. He's a social democrat, anti-imperialist, and he's done some good things. I think his hands have been tied, but he's part of it's a coalition government. Like I said, there's the PT, the Party of Labor, which is part of the coalition, but there's also a lot of kind of mainstream liberals that are part of it. It's a coalition government. It's better than what was there before. Supports the government of Venezuela, supports Evo Morales, and was good on Bolivia. Takes some generally anti-imperialist positions. It's complicated, right? It's a popular front government. You can call it a popular front. And many different diverse forces in Mexico, currently, but the country is not moving towards socialism by any means. But it's a good development. And I'm glad that there is a, social democratic force in Mexico that is moving maybe in a good direction. Who knows what will happen? Perhaps eventually AMLO, will become a full-blown revolutionary. But at this point, he's better than what was there before. That's all I can say about that. All right, joining the U.S. military. Well, look, someone's asking if someone should do it as a socialist. Well, look, I'm not going to tell you what you should morally do. I'm just going to tell you about the number of people I've met who have been in the U.S. military, excuse me, and have said that joining the U.S. military was like the worst decision in their entire life. They think it was just a big mistake. The treatment that they endured in the boot camp, the treatment that they got in the military. I have heard just absolute horror stories. From people in the United States who joined the U.S. military. They were absolutely miserable. And, and they've said it was, I knew a guy who, his time to leave the military came, and they told him he had to, re-up, he had to sign up, and he refused to do that. So they gave him a dishonorable discharge. That happens a lot, right? And if you get a dishonorable discharge from the military, that's like a really bad mark on your record. And they do that kind of thing to people. People have had awful experiences, right? There's a lot of veterans, people who fought in Iraq, and such. And, there you go. I just think it would be a mistake. All right. Someone said there was a Falun Gong parade in their neighborhood. Okay. And it was pretty anti-China and anti-communist. Well, yeah, not surprising. I'm glad the New York Times exposed them. The Falun Gong is certainly not a good group, but they're all for Trump, and so that's creating an opening. I think finally some mainstream media had the courage to confront them. They've been a CIA anti-China, counter gang for so long that there's like a fear of exposing them. But I guess they're so solidly in the Trump camp that the section of the ruling class that runs the New York Times felt it was necessary to finally come out swinging against them. Could Sam Cedar defeat Chuck Schumer in 2022? Well, he could, right? 2022 is a long way away. He could, but Chuck Schumer is very, very well connected. In New York, there's a lot of big money here, and it's not the easiest thing to do. It's possible. But Chuck Schumer is very well connected. All right, reform or revolution? Well, here's the thing. I've answered that question many times, and the thing is, okay, so you have to understand what revolution is, okay? Revolution does not mean violence, okay? Revolution simply means one social system being replaced by another social system. Reform simply means not changing the social system, but just adjusting it, right? Now, violence violence only happens, as I've emphasized, in revolutions when people have no other choice, when they, and that peaceful transition is what is advocated by socialists. But there is definitely an event horizon. where, things change. In Venezuela in 2003, they had a new constitution. The government announced it was moving toward 21st century socialism. They had a revolution, right? It wasn't a violent revolution. No one was storming the barricades. There was an attempted coup the year before that was defeated. But that a revolution is a moment where it appears that the state is changing hands, right? And that it's necessary, to restructure the state and to change the nature of the state as you're moving towards socialism. You can't, I think that, for example, in Venezuela, they have the military completely changed the way it operated. It's trained in Cuba. They set up the Bolivarian militias. And the state has to completely be changed when you're moving a country towards socialism. So in that sense, revolution, but revolutions don't mean necessarily have to be violent. Responsible socialists and revolutionaries have always called for a peaceful transition to socialism by utilizing the democratic processes and procedures. And that saying you want a revolution simply means you want the system to change hands. I think that's the issue there. Okay, Trump or Biden when it comes to Kim, and that goes with the next question. Why doesn't Trump fix what Bolton broke with DPRK? Well, I think that the forces that wanted to prevent Trump from negotiating with North Korea have the upper hand. The other thing is, it's not just Bolton. Yeah, Bolton's out of the Trump administration, but there's the whole CIA. I think that Bolton was one guy who was very vocally trying to wreck North Korea negotiations, but I think that there were other forces trying to undermine Trump when it came to North Korea. It wasn't just one guy. I don't know how supportive Pompeo is of negotiating with North Korea, honestly. He seemed a lot more in favor of it than Bolton was, but, Pompeo is a warmongering, insane anti-communist. He's been having the State Department basically post anti-communist memes. I can't imagine that Mike Pompeo is a supporter of it. I think that there's a lot of opposition within the Trump administration to any normalization of relations with North Korea. Joe Biden attacked Donald Trump for daring to do it and referred to North Korea's government as thugs and all of that. And so, yeah, it seems like that's locked and over and done with. But who knows? Who knows what could happen, right? Often things develop in strange ways, right? It could be that if Trump takes off, is sworn in again, he might move ahead with it. It might be that when Biden gets in, even though he called Kim a thug, he'll negotiate with him. Who knows? Who really knows, right? What will happen? A lot of times there are zigs and zags, and a lot of times the issue driving these kind of things is not the personality of the leader. It's the balance of forces internationally. If it looks like North Korea is going to give up its nukes and move ahead, right? And any sensible U.S. leader is going to drastically try to get in on the negotiations, and I think that will eventually happen. It's only a matter of time. That it's only a matter of time before North Korea gives up its nukes and joins with Russia and China in economic development in that part of the world. However, it needs to be reassured that it'll be safe when it gives up its nuclear weapons. In order for North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons, it needs to be reassured that no one's going to invade them. And when they give up their nuclear weapons, they're going to want a lot of economic incentives to do it also. They're going to want a lot of, money that will pour into North Korea, guaranteed. They won't just give them up and get nothing for it. But if it looks like that's going to happen, like it's on the brink of happening, Biden or Trump, would immediately move in. If Iran had nuclear weapons, would Trump treat them so badly? Well, here's the thing, right? Iran does not want nuclear weapons. The Ayatollahs, from the time they took power in 1979 right up to today, have always condemned all nuclear weapons. It's illegal in Iran to even openly advocate getting nuclear weapons. Iran is a member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and every nuclear site in Iran was 100%, 24 hours a day, surveilled by the International Atomic Energy Agency. Right? The notion that Iran was trying to develop a nuclear bomb was the most ridiculous, stupid thing made up. It was Israeli propaganda from the beginning, right? At no point did they ever violate their requirements under the International Atomic Energy Agreement. They did absolutely everything they were required to do under the treaty. Every nuclear site was monitored. That didn't stop Mossad and Mujahideen-e-Khalq from assassinating peaceful nuclear scientists. That didn't stop all the propaganda from going up. And it's like, what's bizarre is that in the United States, both sides seemed to agree with this lie that Iran was trying to develop nukes, right? On the one side, you had, when the nuclear deal was going through, Obama was saying we stopped Iran from getting a nuclear bomb. And when on the other side they said you're giving Iran a nuclear bomb, neither. Like, Iran has never been trying to develop a nuclear bomb ever. Okay, it just did not happen. I didn't miss that super chat, but I'm not going to go there. It didn't happen. Okay, so the whole Iranian nuclear thing was just malarkey, right? I mean, the whole thing was just completely ridiculous, right? Iran is not trying to get nuclear weapons. Meanwhile, it is the most well-known secret in the world, the most well-known secret in the world, that Israel has stockpiles of nuclear weapons. So the only power in the Middle East that has nuclear weapons is Israel, okay? Iran is not trying to get nuclear weapons, has never tried to get nuclear weapons, ever, okay? So, yeah, I mean, that whole crisis was contrived, and both sides were lying. And Iran gave up its peaceful nuclear energy program in exchange for all kinds of things, and then they were stabbed in the back for doing that. And, so, yeah, there you go. Oh, it's getting late, folks. It's getting late. But it's always a pleasure to interact with you guys. Do you have any other questions before we go? I still have a little bit of unnamed orange beverage left. Explain the crisis of overproduction in U.S. history. Well, I don't know what in U.S. history means in particular. Overproduction is the Marxist concept that the worker is never able to purchase back the product that he produces. Right? I'll actually explain it in terms of mathematics. All right? All right. So say that you are creating pens, right? Say that you're making this pen. You're making this pen. So obviously to make this pen, you're going to need the material, right? So that's A. A is the material to make the pen, the parts, the supplies. And then you're going to need the labor to produce the pen. That's B. So A plus B. Then you're going to need, to ship the pen, to transport the pen to wherever it's being sold. So that's C. Plus, and so the cost of the pen, A plus B plus C equals D. The cost of the pen is D. Well, first of all, the capitalist has to get a profit from somewhere, right? The owner, of the factory has to get a profit. So he's going to have to, wait a second. Oh, the labor is B, right? So he's going to have to cut into the labor, right? Because the labor, he can't change how much it costs to ship the pen. He can't change how much it costs to produce the supplies. So B is going to be cut between the worker's pay and the surplus value, right? The capitalist profits is going to come out of B, right? So it's really A plus B1, which is the worker's pay, plus B2, which is the surplus value that the capitalist gets paid, plus C, which is the shipping, equals D, right? So there you go. Well, D, that's the total cost of the pen, can never be equal to B1, right? There is no way that the total cost of the pen can ever be equal to the amount that the worker is paid to produce the pen. There's just no way this can be possible. There is no possible way the worker can ever get paid enough to buy back the product that he produces. Ever. right? That produces a little bit of a problem. If the worker is never paid enough in wages to buy back the product he produces, you will always inevitably get a situation where there are products on the market that cannot be sold. Now, this is the basic problem of capitalism. It becomes exacerbated by technology, right? As technology advances and the worker has less and less role in production, the profit of the capitalist decreases percentage-wise because the profits of the capitalist only can only come from the labor of the worker. And if the labor of the worker becomes less and less a part of the cost of the product, the rate of profit that the capitalist makes decreases. That's called the falling rate of profit. Furthermore, the capitalist is just naturally trying to eliminate workers from the assembly line as much as he can, and he's trying to pay the workers as little as he possibly can. And as this process goes on, the difference between what the worker gets paid and the final cost of the product continues to go up. And as a result, you inevitably get a situation where the market is glutted with products that cannot be sold, right? And this is called overproduction. Now, it used to be that this boom-bust cycle, that it went on like every 1 or 2 years, right? It used to be just routine that this would happen. It would just happen routine. So then they developed mechanisms like the Federal Reserve System. They developed other mechanisms that would try to stabilize this, right? So there wouldn't be a panic every 2 years, right? They developed all kinds of methods for stabilizing this, but they still can't deal with this basic problem. I've talked about the housing bubble burst in the United States, and workers were homeless because there were too many houses. People became hungry because there's too much food. This is the built-in problem of the capitalist system, the problem of overproduction, that the worker can never buy back the product he produces. This is what Marx described in Capital as the built-in problem of capitalist production. And it has certainly played out in U.S. history. The Great Depression was a prolonged crisis of overproduction. The 2008 financial meltdown was a crisis of overproduction. And I think that we are continuing to live in a crisis of overproduction, that this is a problem that capitalist production cannot escape. Production for profit inevitably creates a situation like this. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. But this is the built-in problem of production for profit and the capitalist system. Anything else, folks? Any other questions before we go? Anything else? Anything else? Happy Halloween, everybody. Happy Halloween. I remember, folks, I will never forget when I was a kid. I remember that, this was the 90s. I was a kid in a very small town. And I remember that the religious people decided that Halloween was satanic. They decided it was not a holiday that we should celebrate. So at my school, they changed Halloween to the Autumn Festival to accommodate the religious people who were deeply upset by Halloween. And so we called it the Autumn Festival because Halloween was considered to be satanic. And I never quite understood that because, as I pointed out, Halloween is a Christian holiday. It's All Hallows Eve. It comes before All Saints Day. But yes, they thought Halloween was satanic. It was about devil worship or something. And, I remember we had to call it Autumn Festival at my school because, all the religious people were quite upset by Halloween. And most of us, were allowed to dress up for the Autumn Festival. But some of the kids were even religious enough they couldn't even participate in that. I remember that, the Halloween controversies. That was a big thing. What else about Halloween, right? Any other Halloween anecdote I could share? Well, I have never seen I will tell you folks, I like scary movies. I like the Hammer horror films of the 1960s, 50s, and 70s. Christopher Lee, Frankenstein, Dracula, great stuff. I have never, ever developed a taste for slasher movies. There's Halloween, that's one of them. There's like Halloween, and there's, what is it, Friday the 13th, and Scream, and I have never been able to develop a taste for those movies. I don't understand. I don't get it. It's beautiful women being chased around by a guy with a knife or a chainsaw, and he's usually wearing some kind of mask, and he cuts them up and kills them in some horrible, awful way. I just have never been able to develop a taste for that. I don't know what it is. I don't know why people like those particular movies. You know, there's horror movies are great. I mean, horror, scary movies, Dracula, I mean, the kind of the gothic genre where it's like, it takes place in the 1800s in Europe and there's a castle and, I love all that stuff. But the slasher thing, I mean, I just, college age girl, she's getting naked and then all of a sudden the guy pulls out the knife and stabs her or something. I mean, that's awful, right? What's weird is also that it seems to be just basically the is this a word, cinematification, or it was making into movies of what was a very real phenomenon called serial killers, right? Where it was, it used to be very common, that you'd have, guys, these guys who would, kill women in a sexualized manner, or sometimes men, sometimes they were gay. These guys who were, serial killers, right? And they would, grab women off the street or whatever and then cut them into pieces and all this stuff. And it was awful. One of the most unreported things is that we don't have serial killers very much anymore, right? We have mass shooters, which kill a lot more people. But, the whole serial killer thing, it peaked in the 1980s. That was the peak of it. But the first one was in 1888. It was Jack the Ripper. Right, it was Jack the Ripper. It was this guy in London, in the Whitechapel area, in the East End of London. And, there's some people think they know who he is. But we really don't know who it was. He was this wealthy man who would hire prostitutes and then cut them up into pieces. It was a huge scandal in Britain. Nothing like this had ever happened before. And so the London Times started publishing, I don't know. The London Times started publishing articles by people. People started writing letters to the London Times claiming to be Jack the Ripper. They received thousands of letters. And so then the actual Jack the Ripper infamously sent body parts, I believe, some of the liver and intestines of a woman he had killed in a letter to prove he was the actual Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper. And it was the infamous From Hell letter, that was a horrendous incident. But that was the first major serial killer in history. But, if you continue up through history, right, up into the 30s and 40s, up into the 50s and 60s, and then in the 80s, it was extremely common in the 1980s. It was the peak. You had all kinds of serial killers. But starting in the 90s, it started to decline. And nowadays, it's very rare. You can actually read about this. The Guardian, others have published articles about the serial killer stuff. Doesn't happen anymore. I mean, we have a much bigger problem of mass shooters. That's a much more, those guys, they kill a lot more people. I mean, serial killers, they killed a lot of people. But, mass shootings are a much more dangerous situation. But why is it that serial killers have gone away? Why? There are different theories about why. One theory is that these serial killers, that they start to show signs of being a potential serial killer when they're maybe a teenager, and they get on psych meds. That's one theory. The psych meds is what stops it, right? That the potential serial killer, the next Ted Bundy or whatever. He's going through life, he's going through school, and his parents, his school counselor, his teachers, they all notice there's something off about this guy. They take him to a shrink, they get him some, psych meds, and he's on meds for the rest of his life, and he doesn't kill anybody. That's one theory. Not sure I buy that. Another theory that people have is that these killings are somehow rooted. This is like the Freudian theory, but these killings are somehow rooted in sexual repression, right? That these, the idea is that if you keep your sexual feelings all bottled up, when they eventually come out, they come out distorted and perverted, right? The guy is constantly like, in theory, according to the Freudian theory, he's ashamed of his sexual feelings. He, every time he gets a sexual urge or something, he feels awful and full of shame. So, he starts to hate women because they turn him on. So he finally just loses control and instead of having sex with them, he cuts them into pieces or something. That's one theory, right? And so the idea is that now that we have a much more sexually open society where pornography is accessible and people aren't made to be feeling ashamed of their sexual feelings, why, these guys, their feelings just come out normally and they don't cut people up. That's one theory. I'm not sure I buy that one. That's the Sigmund Freud theory. That's Sigmund Freud. Another theory is, again, Viagra, right? That these guys, right, are guys who have erectile dysfunction. This is and that they hate women because they have erectile dysfunction. And so they feel deep shame because they can't get the job done, so to speak. So they do something else, which is they engage in violence, right? Or they feel humiliated by women. They feel ashamed of the fact that they have no, that they have erectile dysfunction. And so they're taking out their rage and the shame that they feel because of women. And so now that we have Viagra, these guys just take Viagra and they never, they never do that anymore. That's another theory. What else? I mean, there are a number of theories. We have no idea why it is that, but something about our culture and our society has changed so much from the 1980s to now, that something that started in like the 1880s went all the way up into the 1980s, and around the year 2000 dramatically declined, right? Is it the internet? Is it, what is it? I mean, who knows? Is it Viagra? Is it psych meds? Is it, our culture has just changed. What is it? What is it that got rid of the serial killer? I think it's a good, we ought to figure out what it is because it's a good thing. However, now we have this bigger problem, right? The school shooter, right? The school shooters kill a lot more people. So, it's just something to think about. I never liked slasher movies. I just don't find them to be entertaining. I mean, they don't have very good stories. It all revolves around, and then the thing is, right, isn't it in the 70s they started making these movies, right? Halloween, Friday the 13th, all that. So, like, at a time when that was actually a real thing that happened, why would you make a movie about it? I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's like these movies are they advertising for it? I mean, I don't know. But then again, those movies are still around. They still show them on TV, but now the crisis has declined. So who knows what it is? The theory, interestingly, not to diss the left, but it's important to admit when we're wrong, because sometimes we're wrong. The left in the 1970s largely blamed pornography, right? And they said it was pornography and misogyny, that this was a reaction of men to the women's movement, right? It was men were angry that women were getting rights. Men were, looking at Playboy magazine or whatever, and that's what was causing it. And that's been debunked. I mean, because there's more feminism now than ever before, right? Feminism and women's rights is at a height now, and we're not seeing a return of serial killers. So that has been debunked. The idea, and there's more pornography now than ever before. There's more pornography now than ever before. I mean, the internet, people are getting it on their phones and everything. Plus, there's more feminism and women's rights activism and such than ever before. And we're not seeing more of these killings. So I don't think it was caused by that or a response to that. I mean, you could argue maybe now, right, the men have grown up with it, so they're not in reaction to, who knows? Who knows? At the end of the day, who really knows? Who knows, right? Who knows? I'm not a criminologist. I'm not a criminal psychologist. I don't know why, but, we ought to report on good news, for goodness sakes, right? And the fact that there aren't serial killers anymore, for the most part. I mean, it happens every so often. It rarely happens nowadays. Is good news, and they don't report on good news, right? They report on bad news. They report on the fact that that now we have other problems that are much bigger. But, the fact that, hey, we don't have serial killers anymore, the creepy guy who grabs women and cuts them into pieces, or in some cases grabs young men and cuts them into pieces in a sexual way because it gets him off, that doesn't happen anymore. That, to be fair, that is one little area in which society has greatly improved. We have overcome serial killers. People will read about serial killers in the future, and they'll say, that was sure weird that happened in the United States. And they were right. And it happened there was one in the USSR, I believe, in the 80s. There was like one, right? And the whole country was in shock. And the media, at the time it was happening, actually blamed it on Western capitalism. And you can read, and at the time in the USSR in the 80s, there was an increased, presence of Western capitalism. And they argued in Soviet media this was a Western problem that had, had found its way into the Soviet Union. And they may not be wrong about that. Look, the fact that Jack the Ripper emerged in 1888, at the time when British imperialism was like on the rise, when British culture, they were very much, trying to build a very authoritarian, military, warlike culture, where parents were being encouraged not to hug their children or give affection to their children, where corporal punishment was being, implemented in like a scientific manner in British schools. You can read about the British like obsession with caning, and like they turned beating children in school into like a scientific process almost practically. And you read about some of the stuff that was going on with the schoolmasters in that time. As Britain is emerging to become like a major imperialist power, right? Not a colonialist power, but an imperialist power, right? The rise of the economic system that Lenin describes in his book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. That's also the moment where the serial killer thing takes off. It really just gets going. I think it's fascinating. And I talk about that in my book, City Builders and Vandals in Our Age. So you all should check that out. I guess that comes to mind when I'm thinking about Halloween, just because of the whole, Halloween movie series or whatever. What else is on people's minds? Anything else before we go here, right? We got, I'm not in a rush to get anywhere, obviously, so we can keep talking for a little while. What else is on people's minds? Anything else, folks, before we shut this down? Before we wrap this up, is there anything else people would like to talk about this lovely evening? Oh boy. Yeah. Okie dokie. Well, I guess not. So on that note, folks, a new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Pterodactyl. And we need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Pterodactyl. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. Have a good night, folks.